What do you mean he can't fly? That man has more flight hours than everyone in this tower combined. The small regional airport buzzed with its usual Tuesday morning activity. Outside the wall-tile windows, a gleaming Cessna 172 sat on the tarmac, catching the early morning light. Inside the NAL, passengers clutched coffee cups and scrolled through phones, barely paying attention to the confrontation unfolding near the flight operations desk. At the center of the storm stood Harold Winters, a weathered man in his late 60s with silver hair peeking out from beneath a faded blue cap. His posture remained perfect despite his age, spine straight, shoulders square, eyes forward. The only sign of his increasing frustration was a slight tightening around his mouth as he listened to the young operations manager explain, yet again, why his medical clearance was being questioned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Winters, but the new protocols are very clear," said Tyler Bennett, the airport's recently appointed operations manager. He adjusted his designer glasses and tapped at his tablet with manicured fingernails. "Your medical certification requires additional review before you can take any aircraft up." Harold placed his worn leather flight bag on the counter, weathered fingers resting beside it. "My medical was renewed just last month. FAA certified. Same as the last 40 years. The small crowd of pilots and airport staff that had gathered began to shift uncomfortably. A few exchanged knowing glances. Harold Winters was something of a fixture at Ridgeline Regional. He'd been flying out of this airport longer than most of the staff had been alive. "Rules are rules, Mr. Winters," Tyler continued, not bothering to look up from his tablet. "And besides, with all due respect, perhaps this is a sign that it's time to consider retirement. Flying is a young person's game these days." A sharp intake of breath came from several onlookers. The terminal seemed to grow quieter, the background noise of announcements and rolling luggage fading as more people turned to watch the confrontation. Harold's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. "Son, I was landing aircraft in conditions you can't even imagine while you were still learning your ABCs." Tyler's face flushed red as he straightened his tie. "That may be, Mr. Winters, but my decision is final. You're grounded pending further review, which could take weeks, I'm afraid. Security will escort you from the operations area if necessary." Harold Winters had never been one to draw attention to himself. At 68, his lean frame carried the kind of strength that comes from decades of discipline rather than gym memberships. His hands, calloused and steady, bore the faint scars of a man who had worked on engines as often as he'd flown them. The blue cap he wore, faded from years of sun exposure, bore no insignia, just a simple silhouette of an aircraft that those in the know might recognize as an F-4 Phantom. What few people at Ridgeline Regional knew was that Harold had spent 27 years as an Air Force pilot before transitioning to civilian life. He'd flown everything from training aircraft to advanced fighters, served in multiple conflicts, and had concluded his military career as a flight instructor at the Air Force Academy. His retirement from military service hadn't been the end of his flying days, just a change of uniform. For the past 15 years, Harold had maintained a perfect safety record as a flight instructor at Ridgeline. 3 days a week, he took aspiring pilots up in that same Cessna, teaching them with the patience and precision that had made him legendary among Air Force cadets. The other 2 days, he volunteered with Angel Flight, transporting medical patients who couldn't afford commercial travel to specialized treatment centers. "I verified your documentation twice, Mr. Winters," Tyler Bennett continued, his voice carrying the smug confidence of someone who knew he held all the power in this situation. "Our new safety protocols require additional validation for pilots over 65. It's a liability issue." Tyler had come to Ridgeline just 6 months ago, part of a corporate restructuring after the small airport had been acquired by a national management company. At 32, he had an MBA and a commercial pilot's license with minimal hours, most of them in simulators. What he lacked in experience, he made up for in corporate polish. His pressed shirt, designer glasses, and the executive lanyard around his neck all spoke of someone more concerned with appearances than substance. The other staff had quickly learned that Tyler was ruthlessly pursuing cost-cutting measures while trying to impress corporate headquarters with his efficiency metrics. "Maybe it's time to make way for the next generation," Tyler added with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Aviation has changed. It's all digital systems, efficiency algorithms, cost management. The old ways of flying by the seat of your pants, those days are gone." A woman standing nearby, one of Harold's former students who now piloted for a regional airline, shook her head in disbelief but remained silent. Others looked down, unwilling to challenge the new management, but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Comment: respect our veterans if you believe experience should be valued over bureaucracy. The tension in the terminal grew as Harold's former student, Captain Lisa Reeves, finally stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, I have to object. Mr. Winters taught me everything I know about handling crosswinds and emergency procedures. His techniques saved my aircraft and 50 passengers last winter during that ice storm." Tyler barely glanced at her. "This isn't a democracy, Captain Reeves. This is about policy compliance and risk management." He turned back to Harold. "I'm going to need your airport security badge as well." Harold's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a quiet dignity that seemed to deepen rather than break under pressure. He reached for his badge, the movement deliberate and controlled. "I'd like to see the specific regulation you're citing," Harold said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had navigated bureaucracy for decades. "FAA guidelines allow for medical certification renewal regardless of age, provided all requirements are met. My documentation is complete." Tyler's face flushed slightly as he scrolled through his tablet. "It's an internal policy. Corporate sent it down last week." He shifted uncomfortably. "The details aren't important. What matters is compliance." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Among them was Jerry Blackwell, the airport's longtime head mechanic, who had served as crew chief for AC-130 Squadron before his civilian career. He shot Harold a sympathetic look but remained silent. Nearby, 2 TSA officers watched with interest, whispering to each other. "My flight physical was conducted by Dr. Jameson, who's been FAA certified for 30 years, Harold continued, his voice never rising. "My blood pressure is 118/76. My eyesight is 20/20 corrected. I completed all cognitive assessments with perfect scores." Tyler set his tablet down with more force than necessary. "This isn't about your physical condition, Mr. Winters. It's about modernization and progress. We're implementing new systems, new protocols. The board feels that our instructional staff should reflect our forward-thinking approach." The implication hung in the air. Harold was too old, too traditional, a relic of aviation's past rather than its future. "I see," Harold said quietly. He reached into his flight bag and pulled out a leather logbook, the pages worn soft with decades of entries. "Would you be interested in reviewing my flight hours? Or perhaps my safety record?" Tyler waved his hand dismissively. "Numbers on paper don't reflect adaptability to new systems, Mr. Winters. Our simulators have completely different interfaces now. Our aircraft will soon be upgraded with the latest avionics packages." "I've flown 63 different aircraft in my career," Harold replied. "From prop planes to jets, analog to digital, in combat zones with no instrumentation when necessary." The last detail slipped out without emphasis, but several people in the crowd reacted subtly, a raised eyebrow, a straightened posture. Most had no idea about Harold's military background. He never spoke of it. "That was then," Tyler insisted, his voice taking on an edge of irritation. "This is about now, about the future of aviation. We need instructors who can train pilots for tomorrow's technology, not yesterday's wars." The comment landed like a slap. A few gasps came from the gathering crowd. Jerry the mechanic took half a step forward before catching himself. Harold simply nodded once, his dignity intact despite the insult. He carefully packed his logbook away and lifted his flight bag from the counter. "I'll expect written documentation of this grounding and the specific regulations cited," he said calmly. "I'll also need formal notification sent to the FAA regarding the suspension of my instructional privileges, as required by Federal Aviation Regulation 61-227. Tyler blinked, momentarily thrown by Harold's knowledge of regulatory requirements. "Of course. We'll have that prepared." Harold turned to leave, his back straight as a ruler. The crowd parted respectfully. As he reached the edge of the operations area, Tyler called after him. "And Mr. Winters? Don't bother coming back tomorrow. Or the next day. These reviews take time when we get around to them. Might want to start thinking about other hobbies." Harold had just reached the terminal exit when the first black SUV pulled up outside. Its government plates and tinted windows immediately drew attention. Then came a second vehicle and a third, each with the distinctive markings of military transport. Airport security personnel straightened instinctively, hands moving to radios. The terminal fell silent as the door of the lead vehicle opened. A driver in Air Force dress uniform emerged and quickly moved to open the rear passenger door. The man who stepped out caused several military veterans in the crowd to stand straighter almost by reflex. General Michael Harrington wore his 5 stars with the ease of someone who had earned every one. At 70 years old, his bearing was impeccable, ramrod straight posture, silver hair cut to regulation perfection, and a chest full of ribbons that told stories of service stretching back to Vietnam. His uniform was immaculate, and the command presence he carried walked into the room before he did. Behind him came a small contingent of aides, 2 full colonels, a lieutenant colonel carrying a briefcase, and 4 Air Force security personnel, who quickly took up positions near the entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced one of the colonels in a voice accustomed to being heard across airfields, "General Michael Harrington, Joint Chiefs of Staff, United States Air Force." Conversation stopped. Phones lowered. Several people with military backgrounds automatically stood at attention. The general's gaze swept the terminal before settling on Harold, who still stood near the operations desk with his flight bag. "Colonel Winters," the general called out, using Harold's military rank. "At ease, old friend." A ripple moved through the onlookers. Colonel Winters? The Harold Winters they knew as a quiet flight instructor had been a full-bird colonel? Harold turned, and for the first time that day, a small smile touched his lips. He set down his flight bag and offered a perfect salute. "General Harrington." "It's been a while, sir." The general crossed the terminal floor with purposeful strides, returning the salute before grasping Harold's hand in a firm handshake. 7 years, 3 months, and approximately 12 days since your retirement ceremony at the Pentagon. The 2 men stood face to face, and the similarities in their bearing became apparent: the same generation, the same training, the same code. "I see civilian life has treated you well," the general said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed terminal. "It has, sir. Until recently." The general's eyebrow raised fractionally. "So I've been informed." He turned toward the operations desk where Tyler Bennett stood frozen, tablet clutched to his chest. "You must be the operations manager who's grounded one of the finest pilots the Air Force has ever produced." Tyler swallowed visibly. "Sir, that wasn't a question, son." The general's tone remained conversational, but it carried the weight of decades of command. He turned to one of his aides. "Colonel Davis, the file, please." The lieutenant colonel stepped forward with the briefcase, opening it to reveal a digital tablet. He tapped the screen several times before handing it to the general. "Colonel Harold Winters," General Harrington began, reading from the file. "United States Air Force, retired. 27 years of active service. Over 10,000 flight hours in 63 different aircraft types. Decorated combat pilot in 4 major conflicts. Former commander of the 58th Special Operations Wing. Lead test pilot for the Advanced Tactical Aircraft Program. Recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor 3 times. With each achievement, the crowd's murmurs grew. Captain Reeves looked at her former instructor with new understanding. Jerry the mechanic nodded with a knowing smile. Additionally, the general continued, Colonel Winters served as the president's personal pilot for Air Force One during 2 administrations and was entrusted with the safety of 3 secretaries of defense during overseas missions in active combat zones. The general handed the tablet back to his aide and fixed Tyler with a penetrating stare. "And you, young man, are questioning his ability to fly a Cessna?" Tyler's face had gone from red to white. "Sir, I was just following corporate policy for—" "Oh, we'll get to your corporate policy shortly," the general interrupted. "But first, I'd like a word with the airport director and whoever is responsible for regional air traffic control. I believe that would be the individuals in the tower." Within minutes, the airport director, a nervous man named Philip Grayson, appeared from his office. The tower supervisor was contacted via radio and instructed to join them immediately. The general staff efficiently cleared a conference room adjacent to the operations area, and the growing crowd watched through glass walls as the meeting convened. General Harrington sat at the head of the table, with Harold quietly taking a seat to his right. The airport director, tower supervisor, and a visibly uncomfortable Tyler Bennett sat across from them. The general's aides remained standing, with Colonel Davis taking notes. "Let me be perfectly clear about why I'm here," General Harrington began, his voice calm but authoritative. "Colonel Winters contacted no one. He filed no complaint. He would never do so, it's not his style." The general leaned forward slightly. I'm here because yesterday, Colonel Winters was scheduled to fly a 7-year-old boy named Michael Peterson to Boston Children's Hospital for emergency treatment. Michael has a rare heart condition. When the flight was suddenly canceled due to Colonel Winters' grounding, my office was notified because the boy's father is a master sergeant currently deployed overseas. Tyler's face drained of what little color it had left. That master sergeant saved 12 of my men during an ambush in Kandahar, the general continued. When I heard what happened, I made some calls. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that one of the most decorated military pilots in modern history had been deemed unfit to fly by someone with, he glanced at a document before him, precisely 340 total flight hours, mostly in simulators. The airport director cleared his throat. General, I assure you, we had no idea about Colonel Winters' background. Our records only show his civilian certifications. And that's exactly how the colonel wanted it, General Harrington replied. Harold never was one to trade on his reputation or accomplishments. But let me fill you in on what's not in your employment records. The general turned a page in the file. In 1991, then Major Winters flew his damaged F-16 behind enemy lines to rescue a downed pilot while under heavy fire. In 2003, Colonel Winters landed a C-130 with no hydraulics and one engine, saving the lives of 27 wounded soldiers. And in 2010, he piloted the first emergency medical evacuation flight into Haiti after the earthquake, landing on a partially collapsed runway that every other pilot had deemed too dangerous. The tower supervisor, a former Navy man, was nodding with increasing respect. But perhaps most relevant to today's situation, the general continued, is what happened in 2015. Colonel Winters was piloting a civilian medevac helicopter, volunteer work he did on weekends, when he encountered unexpected vertical wind shear. Despite almost impossible conditions, he managed to land safely, saving the patient and 3 medical personnel. The general paused. The FAA's investigation concluded that virtually any other pilot would have crashed. They used the flight data to redesign simulator training protocols for wind shear scenarios. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Mr. Bennett, the general said, turning his attention fully to Tyler, I understand corporate policies and efficiency metrics. I've run organizations with budgets larger than your entire corporation. But when you ground a pilot of Colonel Winters' caliber based on age rather than ability, you're not just disrespecting his service, you're potentially putting lives at risk by replacing excellence with mediocrity. Tyler stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Now, the general said, his tone shifting to one used for giving orders, here's what's going to happen. Colonel Winters' flight privileges will be reinstated immediately, with a formal apology. The corporate policy you cited will be reviewed by FAA officials for age discrimination violations. And effective immediately, all operations in this tower will be suspended for a comprehensive safety culture evaluation. The tower supervisor's head snapped up. Suspended, sir? That's correct. I've already spoken with Regional Air Traffic Control. They'll handle all traffic remotely until the evaluation is complete, which, depending on what we find, could take days or weeks. The effects were immediate and far-reaching. Within 30 minutes, flights were being redirected to other regional airports. The control tower stood eerily quiet, its lights still on, but its communications silenced. Airport staff gathered in small groups, discussing the morning's events in hushed tones. Tyler Bennett was escorted to clear out his desk. His employment terminated not just from Ridgeline Regional, but from the entire Airport Management Corporation. The corporate headquarters issued an immediate apology to Colonel Winters and announced a complete review of their hiring and policy implementation procedures. As for Harold, he accepted the apologies with the same quiet dignity with which he had faced the disrespect. By afternoon, he was in the cockpit of his Cessna with Michael Peterson and his mother on board, bound for Boston. The general had arranged for military air traffic control to give them priority clearance the entire route. Captain Lisa Reeves approached Harold before he boarded. Sir, I had no idea about any of it. Why didn't you ever mention your service? Harold adjusted his faded blue cap. The work speaks for itself, Captain. Always has. The impact on the airport community was profound. Jerry the mechanic organized a proper recognition ceremony for the following month, inviting local veterans and aviation enthusiasts to honor not just Harold, but all the veterans who had transitioned to civilian aviation roles. The airport director established a mentorship program pairing experienced pilots with young aviators, emphasizing that wisdom comes from flight hours, not just digital interfaces. 3 days later, when Harold returned from Boston with news that young Michael's surgery had been successful, he found his small office near the flight school completely transformed. The walls, once bare, now displayed shadow boxes with his military awards, photos of the aircraft he had flown, and letters of appreciation from those whose lives he had touched, all collected by fellow airport employees who had quietly known pieces of his story over the years. In the center hung a simple framed quote: "Judge skill by performance, not appearance. Judge character by actions, not words." Sometimes, the most extraordinary heroes live among us unrecognized, asking for no acknowledgement, seeking no praise. They simply continue to serve, guided by the same principles that defined their military careers: excellence, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to others. Next time you see an elderly man or woman quietly going about their day, remember, you might be looking at someone whose story would leave you in awe. Respect isn't earned by demanding it, but by living a life worthy of it. Share if you believe America's veterans deserve our deepest respect and gratitude, not just on Veterans Day, but every day.